The dust kicked up in violent swirls as Zara Jenkins stumbled backward, her cheeks stinging not from the gritty particles but from the fresh slap her stepmother had delivered. The year was 1876, and Virginia City, Nevada, once a booming silver mining town, was suffering the slow decline that followed the depletion of the Comstock lode. But Zara's humiliation felt far more immediate than the town's gradual economic deterioration. "Worthless, just like your father said," Alina Jenkins spat, adjusting the lace cuffs of her dress with hands that had never seen a day of real work. 19 years old, and what do you have to show for it? Nothing but wild ideas and dirt under your fingernails." Zara fought back tears as the small crowd of onlookers pretended not to notice the public dressing down. The general store's wooden porch creaked beneath her boots as she took another step back, nearly tumbling down the 3 short steps to the dusty Main Street. "I told you to stay away from those books and those ridiculous drawings. What man will have you with your head full of machinery and your hands rough as a miner's?" Alina continued, her voice carrying down the street. "Your father may have tolerated your peculiarities, but I won't have you embarrassing this family further." From across the street, Xavier Wright watched the scene unfold, his weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. At 26, he'd seen his share of cruelty in the years since the war between the states ended. But something about the young woman's quiet dignity, as she absorbed her stepmother's vitriol, caught his attention. He'd noticed her before, always with a book or sketch pad, always with that faraway look that spoke of bigger dreams than Virginia City could contain. Xavier adjusted the leather tool belt around his waist, the implements of his trade as a farrier and occasional ranch hand clinking softly. He'd been in town less than a month, working at the livery stable while saving money to buy his own spread someday. He wasn't one to interfere in family matters, but as the stepmother raised her hand to deliver another blow, his boots were moving before his mind had fully decided. "Madam," he called out, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs of the gathered spectators, "I believe Mr. Holloway is looking for you at the milliner's. Something about that special order from San Francisco arriving early." Alina Jenkins paused mid-tirade, her hand frozen in the air. Her expression shifted instantly from rage to the practiced smile she reserved for Virginia City's social circles. "Is that so? Well, I mustn't keep him waiting." She shot Zara one final withering glare. "We'll continue this discussion at home. And put those foolish sketches away before someone else sees them." As Alina swept away in a rustle of expensive fabric, Zara knelt to gather the scattered papers that had spilled from her satchel during the confrontation. Her hands trembled slightly as she collected detailed mechanical drawings, innovations for mining equipment, water pumps, and what appeared to be an improved steam engine design. Xavier stepped forward, bending to retrieve a sheet that had blown against the hitching post. "These are mighty impressive, Miss Jenkins," he said quietly, studying the precise linework and careful notations before handing it back. "Never seen the like from engineers twice your age." Zara snatched the paper from his hand, her face flushed with embarrassment. "They're nothing. Just silly nonsense like she says." She stuffed the drawings into her satchel, avoiding his eyes. "And there's no Mr. Holloway waiting at the milliner's, is there?" A slight smile tugged at the corner of Xavier's mouth. "Not that I'm aware of, but it bought you some peace, didn't it?" He extended his hand. "Xavier Wright. I work down at Peterson's livery." "I know who you are," Zara replied, reluctantly accepting his help to stand. "Everyone knows the new farrier who can calm even Judge Billings' mean-spirited stallion." She brushed dust from her simple blue dress, practical, unlike her stepmother's elaborate attire. "Thank you for the intervention, Mr. Wright, but it wasn't necessary. I'm quite accustomed to my stepmother's opinions. Seems to me her opinions aren't worth much, Xavier said, nodding toward her satchel. Those drawings, on the other hand, those looked valuable. Zara's posture stiffened. They're impractical fantasies according to every man who's seen them. Women don't design machines, Mr. Wright. We embroider pillows and arrange flowers and make suitable marriages. The bitterness in her voice couldn't mask the underlying pain. My pa used to say folks who tell you what can't be done are usually scared of what happens when you do it, Xavier replied, his blue eyes serious beneath the brim of his hat. Those drawings were sound work. The adjustments to that water pump design could save miners' lives. Surprise flickered across Zara's face. You understood what you were looking at. Enough to know talent when I see it, he answered. Before I started shoeing horses, I worked in my uncle's machine shop back east. Learned to read blueprints before most boys learn to read books. For the first time, Zara looked directly at him, taking in his tall frame, the capable hands, and the intelligence behind his steady gaze. Well, Mr. Wright, you appear to be the only person in Virginia City who thinks a woman's technical drawings are worth anything. Call me Xavier. He tipped his hat slightly. And I suspect I won't be the last. Those ideas just need the right audience. The sound of Aliner's voice calling from down the street made Zara flinch. I should go. Thank you again for your creative intervention. She hesitated, then added quietly, It's Zara. My name, that is. I know who you are too, Zara Jenkins, Xavier said with a small smile. The girl who's always sketching what others can't imagine. As Zara hurried away, Xavier remained on the wooden sidewalk, watching her retreating form. Something about her determination, despite the town's and her family's dismissal, resonated with him. He'd recognized the calculations in her margins, the structural innovations that showed an intuitive understanding of mechanics most trained engineers took years to develop. Virginia City had seen its fortunes rise and fall with the silver veins that ran through the nearby mountains. But Xavier suspected the most valuable resource in this dusty town might be the mind of a young woman everyone had foolishly underestimated. The Jenkins house stood on C Street, once the most prestigious address in Virginia City during the height of the silver boom. Now, like many of the grand homes, it showed signs of fading glory, peeling paint on the ornate trim, a sagging step on the front porch, garden beds where only the hardiest plants survived the neglect. Inside, the situation was much the same. Remnants of wealth carefully maintained for appearances while necessities went unaddressed. Zara slipped through the kitchen entrance, hoping to avoid another confrontation with her stepmother. The house had been different when her father was alive, warm, filled with books and conversation, a place where her curiosity had been encouraged rather than condemned. After his death 3 years ago in a mining accident, Aliner had quickly remarried, bringing Zara's stepbrother Thomas into their home and pushing Zara increasingly to the margins. You're back late, came a voice from the pantry doorway. Thomas Jenkins leaned against the frame, an apple in his hand. At 22, he had his mother's calculating eyes and none of her social graces. Mother's in quite a state about your public display today. It wasn't my display, Zara said tersely, moving to the sink to wash her hands. I wasn't the one shouting in front of Whitman's General Store. Thomas took a loud bite of his apple. Your problem, sister dear, is that you don't know your place. All this nonsense about inventions and mechanics, it's embarrassing. Mother's only trying to make you marriageable. Perhaps I don't wish to be marriageable if it means giving up everything that makes me who I am, Zara replied, drying her hands on her apron. You don't have the luxury of choice, Thomas smirked. Father left everything to Mother, or have you forgotten? Without a husband, you'll have nothing. The reminder stung because it was true. Her father's will, rewritten during his final illness when his mind was clouded by pain and laudanum, had left Zara entirely dependent on her stepmother's goodwill, a commodity in increasingly short supply. "I haven't forgotten," she said quietly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to start dinner." "That won't be necessary," Alina announced, sweeping into the kitchen in a rustle of silk. Her earlier anger had been replaced by a strange, satisfied smile that immediately put Zara on guard. "We're dining with the Prestons tonight. Margaret specifically requested your company." Zara groaned inwardly. Margaret Preston was Virginia City's most determined matchmaker, and her dinner invitations were thinly disguised opportunities to parade eligible young women before potential husbands. "I'm not feeling well," Zara began, but Alina cut her off. "You're feeling perfectly fine, and you'll wear the blue dress I had made for you last month." Her stepmother's tone left no room for argument. "The Preston's nephew is visiting from Sacramento. He's an accountant with the railroad company, exactly the kind of stable, respectable man you need." Thomas snickered. "Try not to bore him with talk of gears and pulleys, Zara. Men prefer women who know when to stay silent." Zara bit back a retort, knowing from experience that arguing would only make things worse. "What time should I be ready?" 6 o'clock. "And do something with your hair, it looks like you've been standing in a windstorm." Alina looked her up and down critically. "Perhaps this will be the night you finally show some sense about your future." After they left, Zara leaned against the kitchen counter, frustration burning in her chest. The dinner would be another exercise in humiliation. She'd be presented like merchandise at auction, expected to simper and agree while men discussed politics and business as if she couldn't possibly understand such matters. With a sigh, she reached into her satchel and withdrew her most recent sketch, a design for a ventilation system that could reduce the deadly gases in the deeper mine shafts. If only someone would look at her ideas with the clear-eyed assessment Xavier Wright had shown today instead of dismissing them as a woman's frivolous hobby. Xavier. The thought of him brought an unexpected warmth. He'd seen her work and understood it, treated her ideas with respect rather than condescension. It was a novel experience, being taken seriously. Tucking the drawing away, Zara resigned herself to the evening ahead. She would endure another uncomfortable dinner, another round of thinly veiled insults about her unmarriageable nature, another man who would look through her rather than at her. But for the first time in a long while, she found herself wondering if perhaps there was at least one person in Virginia City who saw something in her worth valuing. The dinner at the Prestons was every bit as excruciating as Zara had anticipated. Margaret Preston's nephew, Howard, proved to be a balding man of 35 who spoke incessantly of railroad freight tariffs and looked at Zara as if assessing a moderately valuable piece of livestock. "Miss Jenkins, I understand you have quite the unconventional education," Howard remarked during dessert, dabbing at his mustache with a napkin. "Your stepmother tells me your late father indulged your interest in mathematics and science. How curious." "My father believed an educated mind was valuable regardless of gender, Mr. Preston," Zara replied, keeping her tone neutral despite the condescension in his voice. "Well, I suppose such knowledge might help a woman manage a household budget," he conceded with a patronizing smile. "Though I've always found that too much education makes ladies discontent with their natural sphere." Alina nodded enthusiastically. "Precisely what I've told Zara. A woman's fulfillment comes through marriage and motherhood, not filling her head with impractical notions." Some of history's most practical innovations came from what others dismissed as impractical notions. Zara couldn't help responding. The telegraph was once considered a fantasy, yet now it connects our entire nation. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Howard's expression soured, and Alina shot Zara a warning glare. "What charming dinner rolls, Margaret," Alina said loudly, changing the subject with desperate brightness. "You simply must share your recipe." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of pointed looks and stilted conversation. By the time they returned home, Zara's head was pounding from the effort of biting her tongue. "You deliberately sabotaged yourself tonight," Alina hissed as they entered the house. "Howard Preston is an excellent match, financially secure, respected in his profession. Do you think men like that grow on trees in Virginia City?" "I answered his question honestly," Zara replied, removing her shawl. "If honesty is sabotage, perhaps he's not such an excellent match after all." Alina's face hardened. "Your father spoiled you with his progressive nonsense. No wonder you can't secure a husband. What man wants a wife who thinks herself his intellectual equal?" "A man secure enough in himself not to feel threatened by a woman with a mind of her own," Zara suggested, immediately regretting the words when she saw the fury in her stepmother's eyes. "You've become impossible," Alina snapped. "I've tried to guide you, to help you find a suitable position in society, but you resist at every turn. Well, I've reached the end of my patience." She drew herself up, her voice turning cold. "You have until the end of the month to either accept a marriage proposal or find employment and lodging elsewhere. I will no longer support your willful defiance under my roof." The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Although Zara had always known her welcome in her childhood home was tenuous, hearing the threat spoken aloud sent a chill through her. Employment opportunities for women in Virginia City were severely limited. She could become a teacher if she had the proper credentials, which she didn't, or a seamstress, which her mediocre sewing skills precluded, or a saloon girl, which was unthinkable. "You can't mean that," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This was my father's house." "And now it's mine," Alina replied without a trace of sympathy. "Perhaps necessity will finally teach you what reason could not." With that, she turned and ascended the stairs, leaving Zara alone in the darkened entryway. Zara stood motionless, her mind racing through her limited options. She had a small amount of money saved from odd jobs copying documents for the assay office, tutoring the druggist's children in arithmetic, but nowhere near enough to establish herself independently. The end of the month was barely 3 weeks away. Sleep eluded her that night. As dawn broke over the distant mountains, Zara made a decision. If Virginia City offered her no path forward, perhaps it was time to create her own. The next morning, Zara rose early and dressed in her simplest skirt and shirtwaist. She packed a small satchel with her most important drawings, her father's pocket watch, and the few dollars she had saved. The mining equipment workshop on the edge of town occasionally hired day laborers when orders were heavy. It wasn't much, but it might be a start. The walk through town took her past Peterson's livery, and despite herself, Zara found her steps slowing. Through the wide doors, she could see Xavier at the forge, his sleeves rolled up as he hammered a glowing horseshoe. The rhythmic clanging paused as he looked up and caught sight of her standing hesitantly at the entrance. "Miss Jenkins," he called, setting down his hammer and wiping his hands on his leather apron. "Bit early for a social call, isn't it?" Zara straightened her shoulders. "It's not a social call, Mr. Wright. I'm looking for work." Xavier's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded toward a bench near the door. "Mind waiting a moment while I finish this shoe? Old man Peterson doesn't pay me to socialize." For the next 15 minutes, Zara watched as Xavier returned to the forge, his movements efficient and practiced as he shaped the metal, cooled it in a nearby bucket, and examined his work with a critical eye. There was something mesmerizing about the process, the transformation of raw material into something functional through skill and understanding of the material's properties. Finally, he hung the finished horseshoe on a rack with others and approached, pulling a stool over to sit facing her. "Now, what's this about looking for work? Forgive my bluntness, but you don't strike me as someone in need of employment." "Appearances can be deceiving," Zara replied. She briefly explained her situation, the ultimatum, her lack of conventional options, her determination not to be forced into marriage as her only means of survival. "I have skills that could be useful. I understand mechanical systems. I'm good with numbers and calculations, and I'm willing to learn." Xavier listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. "The mining equipment workshop won't hire you," he said finally. "Jackson, who runs it, is as traditional as they come. Won't even let his own daughters help with the bookkeeping." Zara's hopes fell. "I see." "Well, thank you for— I didn't say I couldn't help," Xavier interrupted. "I've been taking on repair work for some of the smaller mines' equipment they can't afford to replace but need fixed quickly. It's been getting to be more than I can handle alone." He studied her for a moment. "You really understand mechanical systems, not just theory, but how they work in practice." "My father was the mining engineer at the Consolidated Virginia before he died," Zara explained. "He taught me everything he knew. I've been designing improvements to existing equipment since I was 14. She hesitated, then opened her satchel and handed him one of her drawings. "This is my design for a more efficient water pump for the deeper shafts. The current models lose pressure below 600 feet. Xavier examined the drawing with professional interest, his fingers tracing the innovative valve system she designed. "This would work," he said finally, looking up at her with new respect. "It would work damn well, actually. Sorry for the language," he added. "I've heard worse in mining camps," Zara said with a small smile. "So, are you offering me a job? A partnership of sorts," Xavier clarified. "I can handle the physical labor and the business dealings. Men who won't take designs from a woman will accept them from me. You can handle the technical improvements and help with the actual repair work when it's needed. We split whatever we make." It wasn't what Zara had expected when she set out that morning, but it was far better than anything else available to her. "When do we start?" "Right now, if you're willing," Xavier said, standing up. "I've got a broken ore crusher from the Yellow Jacket that needs to be running by tomorrow. Owner's offering double pay for a quick fix." For the first time in months, Zara felt a spark of genuine hope. "Show me the machine." That day marked the beginning of a transformation for Zara. Under the guise of being Xavier's assistant, she was able to put her knowledge to practical use. The broken ore crusher proved to have a misaligned drive shaft that was causing excessive vibration and stress on the main bearings. While Xavier handled the heavy lifting, Zara identified the problem and directed the repairs with a confidence that surprised even herself. "You've got a gift for this," Xavier commented as they watched the repaired crusher operate smoothly. "Took me 10 minutes just to figure out where to start looking for the problem." "It's the pattern of the vibration," Zara explained, wiping grease from her hands. "Different mechanical failures create different rhythms. My father taught me to listen to the machines as if they were trying to tell you what's wrong." Xavier nodded thoughtfully. "My uncle said something similar. Seems you and I had similar teachers, just in different classrooms." As the days passed, their collaboration proved unexpectedly successful. Xavier's reputation as a reliable repairman grew, and with it came more work not just from the smaller operations but eventually from some of the larger mines as well. Zara's technical innovations, presented as Xavier's ideas, gained attention for their effectiveness and ingenuity. Working together in the small workshop space Xavier rented behind the livery, they developed a comfortable rhythm. Zara found herself looking forward to their days together, the easy conversation, the shared satisfaction of solving mechanical problems, the growing respect in Xavier's eyes when she tackled particularly challenging repairs. "You're going to need a place to stay soon," Xavier said one evening as they finished up work on a ventilation fan. The deadline Alina had imposed was rapidly approaching, just 3 days away. "Have you thought about what you'll do?" Zara wiped her hands on a rag, avoiding his eyes. "Mrs. Donovan at the boarding house might take me in if I can afford her rates. With what we've earned so far, I should be able to manage a month or two." "There's another option," Xavier said carefully. "My landlady, Mrs. Hoffman, has a small room above her shop that she's been looking to rent. It's nothing fancy, just a bedroom and a sitting area with a stove, but it's clean and respectable. I mentioned your situation to her, and she's willing to consider it." Zara looked up in surprise. "A single woman living alone, that's hardly considered respectable in Virginia City. Mrs. Hoffman is German and has rather progressive views about women's independence," Xavier explained. "She runs the bookshop on B Street entirely on her own and doesn't much care for local gossip. She said to tell you the room is yours if you want it, no questions asked." The offer was unexpected and touched Zara deeply. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll speak with her tomorrow." As she walked home that evening, Zara realized with a start that she'd spent almost no time thinking about her impending exile from her family home. Instead, her mind had been filled with calculations for a new braking system for the mine carts, ideas for improving their workshop space, and increasingly thoughts of Xavier Wright. He was unlike any man she'd ever known, treating her intelligence as an asset rather than an aberration, valuing her contributions without condescension, seeing possibilities in her that everyone else had dismissed. And if sometimes she found herself watching the way sunlight caught in his hair, or how his hands moved with such precise confidence over their projects, well, that was a distraction she would simply have to manage. Zara was so lost in thought that she nearly collided with Thomas on the front porch of the Jenkins house. "Where have you been all day?" he demanded, blocking her path to the door. "Mother's had everyone looking for you." "I've been working," Zara replied, attempting to step around him. Thomas laughed incredulously. "Working? You at what exactly?" "That's my business," she said firmly. "Now please move aside. I'm tired and would like to go in." "Not until you explain yourself. You've been disappearing every day for weeks." "Mother thinks you're meeting a man secretly, but I know better. No man in Virginia City would have you." The casual cruelty in his words stung, but Zara refused to show it. "As I said, it's my business. And in 3 days, I'll no longer be under this roof or subject to either of your opinions, so what does it matter?" Thomas's expression darkened. "Mother told you about that, did she? Well, good. It's about time you stopped being a burden on this family. Father should never have indulged your ridiculous aspirations." "My father," Zara said quietly, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her, "was the only person who ever saw me clearly, who believed I could be more than just someone's wife or someone's burden. And it turns out he wasn't the only one." "What are you talking about?" Thomas demanded. "I've secured both employment and lodging," Zara informed him, a hint of satisfaction creeping into her tone. "So you needn't worry about my welfare, not that you ever did. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have packing to do." She pushed past her stunned stepbrother and entered the house, her steps lighter than they had been in years. For the first time since her father's death, Zara felt as if she were moving towards something rather than simply trying to avoid being crushed by circumstance. It was a small victory, but it was hers. As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, Zara allowed herself a small smile. In 3 days, she would begin a new chapter in her life, one where her mind was valued, her skills put to use, and her future determined by her own choices rather than the narrow expectations of others. And if that future included continuing to work alongside a certain blue-eyed farrier with capable hands and unexpected respect for her abilities, well, that was a prospect that warmed her more than she cared to admit. The morning, Zara moved her belongings to Mrs. Hoffman's rooms above the bookshop. She expected some reaction from Alina, anger perhaps, or a last-minute attempt to dissuade her. Instead, her stepmother watched from the parlor doorway with cold detachment as Zara carried her small trunk down the stairs. "I suppose you think you're proving something with this display of independence," Alina said, adjusting the cameo at her throat. "How long do you imagine you'll last before you come crawling back?" Zara set her trunk by the door and turned to face the woman who had made her home a battlefield for 3 years. "I won't be coming back," she said simply. "This house stopped being my home when my father died." "Such dramatics," Alina sighed. "Well, when this ill-conceived adventure fails and don't expect any sympathy from me. Virginia City has little use for women who refuse to know their place." "Perhaps that's why it's failing," Zara replied. "Too many minds and hands deemed unusable simply because they belong to women." She picked up her trunk again. "Goodbye, Alina. I hope you find the peace that has eluded you all these years." The walk to B Street was both terrifying and exhilarating. Each step took Zara further from the constraints that had bound her and closer to an uncertain future of her own making. Mrs. Hoffman greeted her warmly at the bookshop, a tall, silver-haired woman with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Herr Wright speaks highly of your character and abilities," the older woman said as she led Zara up a narrow staircase at the back of the shop. "I have no patience for the small minds in this town who think a woman's only value lies in her marital prospects." The rooms were exactly as Xavier had described, simple but clean, with a bedroom just large enough for a bed and dresser, and a sitting room with a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a worn but comfortable-looking armchair by the window. What Xavier hadn't mentioned was the small bookshelf already stocked with technical manuals and scientific journals. "Herr Wright thought you might find these useful," Mrs. Hoffman explained, following Zara's gaze. "He brought them yesterday." "That was thoughtful of him," Zara said, touched by the gesture. "He is a thoughtful man," Mrs. Hoffman agreed with a knowing look that made Zara blush slightly. "Now, rent is due on the 1st of each month. You have your own entrance from the side alley, so you needn't come through the shop. And I don't concern myself with my tenants' visitors so long as they are respectful of the property." The implication was clear, and Zara felt her blush deepen. "I assure you, Mrs. Hoffman, my relationship with Mr. Wright is purely professional." The older woman's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Of course. As was my relationship with my late husband when he first came to repair the bookshelves in my father's shop in Dresden. Most inconvenient how such arrangements can evolve." Before Zara could formulate a response, Mrs. Hoffman handed her a key and departed with a reminder about breakfast being served in the shop's back room at 7 if she cared to join her. Left alone in her new home, Zara took a deep breath and allowed herself to truly feel the magnitude of the change she'd undertaken. Freedom came with its own kind of terror. For the first time, her successes and failures would be entirely her own. No one to blame if things went wrong, but also no one to restrict her potential or clip her wings before she could fly. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it revealed Xavier, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Thought you might need help getting settled," he said. "Though from the size of that trunk you travel lighter than most." Zara stepped back to let him enter. "When your most valuable possessions are ideas, they don't take up much physical space." She gestured to the bookshelf. "Thank you for the books. That was incredibly thoughtful." Xavier shrugged, seeming almost embarrassed by the acknowledgement. "Figured they'd be more use here than gathering dust in my room. Besides, partners should share resources." He looked around the small space. "It's not much, but it's a start." "It's more than I dared hope for a month ago," Zara admitted. "A place of my own, meaningful work, a future that I can shape." "About that work," Xavier said, his expression brightening. "I've got news. The foreman from the Consolidated Virginia came by the workshop this morning. They're having trouble with their main pumping station, the one that keeps the lower levels from flooding. Their regular engineers can't figure out what's wrong." Zara felt a jolt of excitement. The Consolidated Virginia was one of the largest operations on the Comstock, where her father had worked before his accident. "That's a complex system," she said. "Multiple steam pumps working in sequence to move water up from the 1,200-foot level." "Exactly. And they're offering $500 to anyone who can fix it without shutting down operations for more than 12 hours. Xavier grinned. "I told them we'd take a look tomorrow." The amount was staggering, more than many miners earned in 6 months. $500 would be enough to properly outfit a workshop of our own, Zara said, her mind already calculating what equipment they could purchase. "My thoughts exactly," Xavier agreed. "But it won't be easy. The heat down there is intense and the working conditions are dangerous." "I've been down in the mines before with my father," Zara assured him. "I know what to expect." Xavier's expression turned serious. "There's something else you should know. The chief engineer at the Consolidated Virginia is Edgar Simmons. He and your father had some kind of falling out before the accident. There might be complications if he realizes who you are." The name sent a chill through Zara. Edgar Simmons had been her father's assistant, a man who had visited their home for dinner many times, who had always treated Zara with an avuncular affection. After her father's death, however, he had disappeared from their lives completely. "I haven't seen Mr. Simmons in years," Zara said slowly. "He probably wouldn't recognize me now, and even if he did, what could he do? Refuse our help? With $500 at stake, I doubt the mine owners would allow personal feelings to interfere." Xavier nodded, though he still looked concerned. "Just be prepared. Virginia City thrives on connections and old grudges. Your father was well respected, but he also had his share of professional rivalries." "I'll be careful," Zara promised. "Now, tell me everything you know about the symptoms of the pump failure. I want to review the system design before we go in tomorrow." They spent the rest of the afternoon discussing the technical aspects of the job, Zara sketching possible failure points while Xavier contributed his practical knowledge of steam systems and metal fatigue. As the light began to fade, Xavier reluctantly stood to leave. "I should go. Early start tomorrow if we're heading down into the mines." He hesitated at the door. "Zara, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've done. Taking this step couldn't have been easy." "The hardest things are often the most necessary," she replied softly. "But having a friend who believes in me has made all the difference." Friend. The word felt simultaneously right and somehow insufficient to describe what Xavier had become to her. But whatever was growing between them would have to wait. Tomorrow they faced their biggest challenge yet, and potentially their greatest opportunity. After Xavier left, Zara stood at the window watching as he crossed the street, his tall figure easily recognizable even in the gathering dusk. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something dangerous and fragile: hope. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a hint of autumn in the air despite the calendar still showing late summer. Zara dressed in her most practical clothing, a plain skirt and shirtwaist that wouldn't draw attention, sturdy boots, and a canvas jacket borrowed from Xavier that would protect her clothes from the inevitable grime of the mine. They met at the entrance to the Consolidated Virginia mine, the massive headframe towering above them like an industrial cathedral. Miners moved in and out of the yard, some just starting their shifts, others emerging from the depths with exhaustion etched into their faces. "Remember, you're my assistant," Xavier reminded her quietly as they approached the mine office. "Let me do the talking until we're actually working on the pumps." Zara nodded, pulling her hat lower to shadow her face. She tied her hair back severely and smudged a bit of coal dust on her cheeks, small measures that might help disguise her identity if they encountered Edgar Simmons. The mine foreman, a barrel-chested man named Donnelly, greeted them with the desperate air of someone facing potential disaster. "Right, thank God you're here. The lower pumps are failing and we've got water rising at 6 inches per hour. If we can't fix it by tomorrow, we'll have to evacuate the 1,200-foot level." "We'll need to see the pumping station," Xavier said confidently. "My assistant here specializes in water systems." Donnelly barely glanced at Zara, assuming like most men that she was merely there to carry tools or take notes. "Follow me. I'll take you down myself." The descent into the mine was a journey Zara had made many times with her father, but never on her own. The cage, a primitive elevator used to transport men and materials, dropped with alarming speed, the only illumination coming from the lanterns they carried. The temperature rose steadily as they descended, the air growing thicker with humidity, and the distinctive smell of the Earth's interior a mixture of mineral-rich water, dynamite residue, and human sweat. By the time they reached the 1,100-foot level where the main pumping station was located, Zara's shirt was sticking to her back, and she could feel rivulets of sweat tracking through the coal dust on her face. The noise was overwhelming, the constant thud of stamp mills from above, the hiss of steam, the grinding of gears, and the pervasive drip of water from the rock walls. "There she is," Donnelly shouted over the din, pointing to a massive arrangement of pipes, valves, and pulsing machinery. 3 main pumps in sequence, moving water up from the 1,200-foot level. 2 days ago, pressure started dropping in the system. Now we're down to less than half capacity, and the 3rd pump is making noises like a dying cat. Xavier nodded, already examining the nearest pump with professional interest. "How long has this system been in operation?" "About 2 years, Donnelly replied. "Simmons designed it himself after the old system flooded out." Zara moved to the control panel, her eyes taking in the pressure gauges and flow indicators. Something wasn't right about the readings. The pressure differential between pumps was too high, suggesting a blockage or valve failure somewhere in the sequence. "The problem isn't in the pumps themselves," she said, forgetting for a moment to let Xavier lead. "It's in the connection between the 2nd and 3rd stages." Both men turned to look at her with surprise, Donnelly's eyebrows shooting up toward his receding hairline. "Your assistant's a woman?" he asked Xavier incredulously. "The best hydraulic specialist I know," Xavier replied calmly. "And she's right. Look at these pressure readings. The 2nd pump is working too hard because something's restricting flow to the 3rd. Donnelly looked skeptical but desperate enough not to argue. Fine. What do you need to fix it? For the next hour, Zara and Xavier worked in perfect synchronization, isolating sections of the system, testing pressures, and finally identifying the problem: a pressure release valve installed backward during recent maintenance, causing progressive cavitation that was destroying the third pump's impeller. We'll need to replace the impeller and correctly install the release valve, Zara explained, sketching the required modifications. The good news is we can do this without shutting down the entire system. We'll divert flow through the auxiliary channel while we work on the main line. Donnelly looked at the sketch, then at Zara, his expression a mixture of disbelief and growing respect. That's exactly what Jenkins would have suggested, he said slowly. Old Henry Jenkins, I mean. He always said the simplest solution was usually the right one. Zara froze at the mention of her father's name, but Donnelly was already turning away to send a worker for the necessary parts. Xavier caught her eye, a silent question in his gaze. She nodded slightly to indicate she was all right. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, the heat and noise taking a physical toll that Zara refused to acknowledge. By mid-afternoon, they had the system dismantled and were preparing to install the new components when a familiar voice echoed through the pumping station. What the hell is going on here? Who authorized this work? Edgar Simmons strode into the chamber, his once round face now gaunt but still recognizable. His gaze swept over the disassembled machinery with visible alarm before settling on Xavier, and then, finally, on Zara. For a moment he simply stared, confusion giving way to shock and then a cold anger. "You," he said quietly, "Henry Jenkins's daughter, what are you doing in my mine?" Donnelly stepped forward, clearly confused by the hostility. "Simmons, these are the specialists I brought in to fix the pumping system. They've identified the problem, and I don't care what they claim to have found," Simmons interrupted. "This woman has no place in this mine or anywhere near my equipment." He turned to Xavier. "And you bringing an untrained girl into a complex industrial operation. It's criminally negligent." Xavier's posture stiffened, but his voice remained steady. "Miss Jenkins is my partner and the most qualified person in Virginia City to address your pump failure. She's already diagnosed the issue that your team missed." "Partner," Simmons laughed harshly. "Is that what they're calling it these days? Her father filled her head with technical nonsense as a child, but that hardly qualifies her to touch machinery that men's lives depend on." Zara had endured enough dismissal and condescension to last a lifetime. Something in her, a dam holding back years of frustration, finally broke. "The pressure release valve on junction C7 was installed backward," she said, her voice carrying over the mechanical noise. "It's causing cavitation in the third stage impeller, which is why your pumps are failing. My father would have spotted it immediately." Simmons's face darkened. "Your father is dead," he said coldly, "and his reckless approaches to engineering died with him." "My father died because someone tampered with his inspection equipment," Zara replied, a suspicion she'd harbored for years finally given voice. "The gas detector he always carried was found to be miscalibrated after the accident. A coincidence, they said, but he checked that equipment religiously." A tense silence fell over the pumping station, broken only by the mechanical sounds of the remaining operational pumps. Donnelly looked between them, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. "This isn't the time for old grievances," Xavier said firmly. "The mine is flooding. Let us finish our work, Simmons, and then you can sort out your personal issues above ground." For a moment, it seemed Simmons might refuse, but Donnelly stepped in. "The owners want this fixed, Edgar. $500 says we let them finish." Simmons's jaw worked as he struggled with his decision. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Fine, fix it, but I'll be watching every move." He pointed a finger at Zara. "And you'll never work in any mine on the Comstock again after today. I'll see to that personally." As he stalked away to observe from a distance, Xavier moved closer to Zara. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Zara realized her hands were trembling slightly, but whether from anger or the force of the accusation she'd finally spoken aloud, she couldn't tell. "I will be," she answered. "Let's finish this job. We have more riding on it than money now." They returned to work with renewed determination, each movement deliberate and precise as they installed the new impeller and correctly positioned the pressure release valve. Throughout it all, Simmons watched from nearby, his hostility palpable. But with every step of the repair, the rightness of Zara's diagnosis became more apparent. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. Xavier closed the last access panel and nodded to Donnelly, who gave the signal to restart the system. For several tense seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then, with a shudder that Zara could feel through the soles of her boots, the repaired pump began to move. Water flowed, pressure gauges rose to their proper levels, and the ominous sounds that had plagued the third pump disappeared completely. Donnelly's weather-beaten face split into a relieved grin. "By God, you've done it," he turned to the nearest worker. "Tell the men on the 1200 level they can stop evacuation preparations." Even Simmons couldn't deny the success of the repair, though his expression remained sour as he checked the gauges himself. "It seems to be functional," he admitted grudgingly. "We'll see if it holds." "It will hold," Zara said confidently, "and I've drawn up maintenance procedures to prevent this from happening again." She handed Donnelly several pages of careful instructions. The foreman accepted them with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Jenkins. Your father would be proud." The journey back to the surface was made in tense silence, Simmons riding in the cage with them, but refusing to speak or even look at Zara. When they finally emerged into the late afternoon sunlight, Zara felt as if she'd returned from another world, one where she had faced down both mechanical failure and personal demons. In the mine office, Donnelly counted out $500 in cash and handed it to Xavier. "The owners will be pleased," he said. "That's a week of production we didn't lose." Xavier immediately divided the money, handing half to Zara in full view of both men. "Partners share equally," he said, his eyes challenging Simmons to object. The engineer's lips thinned, but he said nothing, turning instead to gather his papers from the desk. As he did, a folded document fell to the floor. Zara bent to retrieve it, her eyes catching a glimpse of the letterhead before she could hand it back. "Patent Office, Washington, D.C." Simmons snatched it from her hand, but not before she recognized a familiar diagram, one of her father's designs for a mine ventilation system, now apparently being patented under Simmons's name. "That's my father's design," she said, the pieces suddenly falling into place. "You stole his work." "That's why you wanted him out of the way." Simmons's face drained of color. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I recognize his handwriting on those calculations," Zara continued, her voice rising. "He showed me that design before he died. He was going to submit it for patent himself." Donnelly looked between them with growing concern. "What's she talking about, Edgar?" "Nothing," Simmons snapped. "The ravings of a girl trying to preserve her father's overblown reputation." Xavier stepped forward, his normally calm demeanor hardened into something more dangerous. "I think we should have the sheriff take a look at that patent application. Compare it to Henry Jenkins's original notes. I'm sure his daughter has preserved them." The threat hung in the air, Simmons's eyes darting between them as he calculated his options. Finally, his shoulders sagged slightly. It wasn't like that, he said, his voice dropping. Henry and I worked on that design together. He promised to include me on the patent, but then he changed his mind, said he wanted to submit it himself. So you tampered with his gas detector, Zara said, the accusation no longer a question but a certainty. You knew he was inspecting the lower levels that day. Simmons's face contorted. It was supposed to be a minor accident enough to keep him away from work while I submitted the paperwork. The detector was only slightly miscalibrated. He should have noticed something was wrong before. He trailed off, the implications of his actions hanging in the air. Donnelly's expression had transformed from confusion to disgust. My God, Edgar, men died in that accident, good men with families. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, Simmons protested, panic edging into his voice. No one was supposed to get hurt. Xavier's hand closed around Simmons's arm in an iron grip. I think we'll let the sheriff sort this out now. The next few hours passed in a blur. Sheriff Donovan was summoned. Statements were taken, and Simmons was led away in handcuffs, his protests falling on increasingly unsympathetic ears as the evidence against him mounted. Zara provided her father's original notebooks, the designs clearly dated and detailed in his distinctive handwriting. Creating a damning comparison to the patent application Simmons had been preparing to submit. By the time Zara and Xavier finally left the sheriff's office, night had fallen over Virginia City, the streets quiet except for the distant piano music drifting from the saloons. Are you all right? Xavier asked as they walked slowly toward B Street, the events of the day settling around them like dust after a storm. I'm not sure, Zara admitted. For 3 years I've wondered if there was more to my father's death than a simple accident, to have it confirmed like this. She shook her head. It doesn't bring him back. Nothing can do that. But at least now there will be justice. Xavier nodded, understanding in his eyes. And the truth about his work will be known. Those patents will be registered in his name now as they should have been. They walked in silence for a block, the weight of the day's revelations creating a strange intimacy between them. When they reached the side entrance to Mrs. Hoffman's building, Zara turned to face Xavier. Thank you, she said simply. Not just for today, but for everything. For seeing something in me when no one else did. Xavier's expression softened in the lamplight. I only saw what was already there, Zara. The rest was all you. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that had been building gradually through their weeks of working together, now impossible to ignore in the emotional aftermath of the day's events. I should go in, Zara said softly, though she made no move to leave. You should, Xavier agreed, equally motionless. When he finally leaned down to kiss her, it felt like the most natural continuation of their partnership, another form of wordless communication between two people who had learned to read each other's thoughts and movements with increasing precision. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, Zara found herself breathless, her hands somehow having found their way to Xavier's shoulders. I've been wanting to do that since I saw you sketching water pumps, Xavier admitted with a small smile. That long? Zara asked, her own lips curving upward. You might have said something sooner. And risk scaring off the best partner I've ever had. Not a chance. His expression grew more serious. Zara, I don't know what happens next for us, but I know I want to find out, if you're willing. In that moment, standing in the shadow of a bookshop in a mining town that had tried to limit her at every turn, Zara felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. The future stretching before her wasn't certain or safe, but it was hers to shape hopefully with the man standing before her, who had seen her potential when everyone else had seen only limitations. I'm willing, she said, and sealed the promise with another kiss. The news of Edgar Simmons's arrest and the subsequent revelation of his role in Henry Jenkins's death spread through Virginia City like wildfire. The story gained additional power from the involvement of Jenkins's daughter, the girl everyone had dismissed as impractical and unmarriageable, who had not only exposed a murderer, but saved one of the Comstock's most valuable mines from potentially catastrophic flooding. For Zara, the immediate aftermath was a strange mixture of vindication and grief renewed. The confirmation of her suspicions about her father's death reopened wounds that had never fully healed, even as it brought closure to questions that had haunted her for years. Eleanor and Thomas Jenkins maintained a frigid silence throughout the proceedings, their embarrassment at their connection to the scandal compounded by the public recognition Zara was receiving. The Virginia City Territorial Enterprise ran a front-page story about the remarkable Miss Jenkins, complete with an artist's rendition of her directing repairs in the mine. "You're famous now," Xavier teased as they sat in their newly rented workshop space, a former assay office they'd secured with their earnings from the consolidated Virginia job. "Soon you'll be too important to associate with a simple farrier-turned-mechanic." Zara looked up from the blueprint. She was revising an improved version of her father's ventilation system. "I believe you mean I'll be too important to associate with my business partner and—" She paused, still unaccustomed to defining what had grown between them in the weeks since their first kiss. "And what?" Xavier prompted, his eyes twinkling as he set down the valve assembly he'd been cleaning. "And whatever else we are to each other," Zara finished, a blush coloring her cheeks. Xavier crossed the workshop to stand beside her drawing table. "I know what I'd like us to be," he said, his voice softer. "Partners in every sense, but I also know you've just gained the independence you fought for. I wouldn't ask you to trade one cage for another." The sincerity in his voice touched Zara deeply. In the month since Simmons's arrest, their business had flourished, with mining companies throughout the Comstock seeking out their expertise. The patent office in Washington had confirmed that Henry Jenkins's designs would be registered in his name posthumously, with royalties to be paid to his heir Zara herself. Financial independence, once an impossible dream, was now reality. But more precious than the money or professional recognition was the partnership she'd built with Xavier, a relationship of equals, founded on mutual respect and deepening affection. "I don't see marriage as a cage if it's with the right person," she said carefully. "My parents had a true partnership. My father valued my mother's mind as much as her heart. I believe she would have continued his work if she'd lived." Xavier's eyes held her steadily. "Is that what you want, Zara? A marriage that's also a partnership?" "It's the only kind I would ever consider," she replied honestly. Xavier took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Then perhaps we should discuss terms," he said with a smile that made her heart beat faster. "I propose equal share in all ventures, professional and personal, joint decision-making on all matters of importance, and a solemn promise to always see each other clearly, even when the rest of the world does not." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes, not of sadness but of a joy so unexpected and complete that it overwhelmed her. "Those terms are acceptable," she managed, "though I'd like to add one condition." "Name it," Xavier said immediately. "That we never allow society's expectations to limit what we might become together," Zara said. "That we build something new, something that makes room for both our dreams." Xavier's answer was a kiss that held both promise and passion, a seal on an agreement more meaningful than any formal contract. They were married 2 months later in Mrs. Hoffman's bookshop, the German woman insisting on hosting the small ceremony when she learned that Alina Jenkins had refused to attend. The guest list was modest but significant. Miners whose lives had been saved by Zara's redesigned ventilation systems, the editor of the territorial enterprise who had championed her story, Donnelly from the Consolidated Virginia, and a handful of others who had come to respect the unusual partnership that was already transforming mining safety throughout the region. As Zara stood beside Xavier, exchanging vows in a simple ceremony that emphasized equality and partnership rather than obedience and subjugation, she felt her father's presence strongly. He would have approved of this man who valued her mind and supported her ambitions, who saw her not as a possession to be acquired, but as a partner to be treasured. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the justice of the peace declared, and the small gathering erupted in cheers that seemed to fill the bookshop to its rafters. Later, at the modest reception held in the back room of Virginia City's most respectable restaurant, Donnelly approached the couple with a proposition that would alter the course of their lives once more. "The owners of the Consolidated Virginia were impressed with your work," he told them, glass of champagne in hand. "They've been discussing establishing a formal engineering department to focus on safety improvements and mechanical innovations." He looked directly at Zara. "They'd like you to head it, Mrs. Wright, both of you working as a team." Zara exchanged a glance with Xavier, seeing her own surprise and excitement reflected in his eyes. "That's unexpected," she said carefully. "Would they truly accept a woman in such a position?" Donnelly chuckled. "After you saved them a fortune and exposed Simmons, they'd be fools not to. Besides, they're businessmen first and foremost. Your designs work, and that's what matters to them." "We'd want to maintain our independent workshop as well," Xavier said. "There are smaller operations that can't afford an in-house engineer but still need help." "I don't see why that would be a problem, as long as there's no conflict with Consolidated Virginia projects," Donnelly replied. "Think about it. $500 a month salary, plus bonuses for any patentable innovations." He smiled at their stunned expressions. "They're prepared to invest in the future, and they believe you two are part of it." After he moved away to refill his glass, Xavier turned to Zara, his expression a mixture of pride and amusement. "Well, Mrs. Wright, it seems you've gone from being unmarriageable to being one of the most sought-after minds on the Comstock in the space of a few months." "We've done it together," Zara reminded him. "And I'm still the same person I was when Alina was telling me I'd never amount to anything. The difference is that now other people can see what you saw from the beginning." "What I saw was easy to recognize," Xavier said softly. "A brilliant mind trapped by other people's limitations. All you needed was the space to prove them wrong." As they moved through the reception, accepting congratulations and well wishes from their guests, Zara felt a profound sense of having come full circle. The town that had once seemed like a prison had become the site of her liberation. The skills that had been dismissed as useless frivolities were now recognized as valuable assets, and the future that had once appeared so bleakly predetermined now stretched before her filled with possibilities. "Penny for your thoughts," Xavier said as they shared their first dance as husband and wife, his arm steady around her waist. "I was thinking about potential," Zara replied. "How it can lie dormant until the right conditions allow it to flourish." "Like those desert flowers that bloom after a rain," Xavier suggested. "Exactly like that." Zara smiled up at him. "You were my rain, Xavier Wright." He laughed softly, pulling her closer. "That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me." As the evening continued, an unexpected visitor arrived just as the celebration was winding down. Alina Jenkins stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the gathering. The room quieted, conversations trailing off as people noticed her presence. Zara straightened, Xavier's hand finding hers in silent support as her stepmother approached. "I thought it appropriate to offer congratulations," Alina said stiffly, "since you are still technically family." "Thank you for coming," Zara replied with equal formality. "Would you like some champagne?" Alina shook her head. "I won't stay. I merely wanted to give you this." She extended a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "It was your father's. I should have given it to you years ago." Zara accepted the package with surprise, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a pocket watch, her father's prized possession, the one he had always said would be hers someday. She had assumed Alina had sold it after his death. "Why now?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alina's composure cracked slightly, a flash of something like regret crossing her face. "Because you've proven me wrong," she admitted. "Your father always said you would make your own way in the world, that your mind was a gift that shouldn't be wasted. I couldn't see it. Or perhaps I didn't want to." She straightened her shoulders. "In any case, the watch belongs to you. It always did." Before Zara could respond, Alina turned and departed as abruptly as she had arrived, leaving behind a small ripple of whispers among the guests. Xavier squeezed Zara's hand gently. "Are you all right?" he asked. Zara looked down at the watch, its gold case worn smooth from years in her father's pocket, the inside engraved with words she knew by heart. "To Henry, may you always find your way, Martha." A gift from her mother to her father on their wedding day. "Yes," she said finally, "I think I am." That night, in the small house they had purchased on the outskirts of Virginia City, a modest structure with a workshop attached and room for future expansion, Zara and Xavier lay together, discussing their plans for the consolidated Virginia position and their independent projects. "We could redesign the entire ventilation system for the deep levels," Zara suggested, her head resting on Xavier's chest. "Reduce the heat and improve air quality at the same time. And that pump system you've been sketching for the new shaft at the Ophir," Xavier added. "With the higher pressure capability, they could expand another 300 feet down." Zara smiled in the darkness. "Is this how most newlyweds spend their wedding night, discussing mining equipment?" Xavier's laughter rumbled beneath her ear. "Probably not. But then, we're not most newlyweds." His arms tightened around her. "I wouldn't have it any other way, though. I love that brilliant mind of yours almost as much as I love the woman it belongs to." "Almost," Zara teased, propping herself up to look at him. "Well, there are other parts of you I'm quite fond of as well," Xavier replied with a grin, pulling her down for a kiss that quickly became more passionate. Technical discussions were set aside for the remainder of the night as they celebrated their union in the most ancient and personal way. Later, as Zara drifted toward sleep in the circle of Xavier's arms, she found herself thinking again of potential not just her own, now being realized, but the potential they had created together. A partnership that transcended the traditional boundaries of marriage in their time. A shared vision that might, in its own way, help reshape the harsh realities of mining life in the West. "What are you thinking about now?" Xavier murmured sleepily. "The future," Zara replied. "Ours and maybe others. If we can make the minds safer, if we can show that women's minds are as valuable as men's, if we can build something that outlasts us." Xavier pressed a kiss to her forehead. "That's a lot to accomplish." "We have time," Zara said, settling against him. "And we've already proven that most things are possible with the right partner." As they drifted off to sleep, Zara's father's watch ticked steadily on the bedside table, marking the beginning of a new chapter not just for them, but perhaps for Virginia City and the Comstock as well. A chapter where potential wasn't determined by gender or social standing, but by the courage to see possibilities where others saw only limitations. 2 years later, Zara stood at the entrance to the main shaft of the consolidated Virginia mine, watching as miners emerged from the cage at the end of their shift. Their faces were still streaked with dirt, but they lacked the exhaustion that had once been the hallmark of men working the deeper levels. The improved ventilation system she and Xavier had designed had reduced temperatures by nearly 20 degrees in the worst areas, and the new safety protocols they'd implemented had cut accidents by more than half. "Mrs. Wright," called one of the miners, tipping his hat as he passed. "That new water cooling system is working like a charm. Makes all the difference down on the 1500 level." "Glad to hear it, Mr. Donovan," Zara replied with a smile. "Let me know if you notice any issues with the pump pressure." She made a note in her ledger, then continued toward the engineering office, a new structure adjacent to the main mine building, constructed specifically to house the department she now headed. Inside, several draftsmen were working on blueprints, while in the adjoining workshop, Xavier supervised the testing of a new drill bit design they developed together. "How's it performing?" Zara asked, setting down her ledger and moving to examine the prototype. Xavier looked up with a grin. 30% faster cutting rate, and the cooling channel keeps it from overheating. I think we've got something here." One of the young engineers, a recent hire from the East, watched their exchange with barely concealed amazement. Though Zara's position was now officially recognized throughout the Comstock, newcomers were often shocked to find a woman directing engineering operations at one of the world's most productive mines. "Mr. Chambers, would you run these calculations for metal fatigue under continuous operation?" Zara asked, handing him several pages of equations. "I want to ensure the bit will hold up for at least 4 hours before needing replacement." "Yes, madam," the young man replied, accepting the papers with a look that had evolved from initial skepticism when he'd arrived 3 months ago to genuine respect. As the workday concluded, Zara and Xavier walked home together as they always did, discussing the day's progress and challenges. Their house had expanded along with their success, a new wing added to accommodate their growing family. The workshop enlarged to allow for more complex fabrication work. "Rebecca was asking about coming to the mine again," Xavier said as they crested the hill that gave them a view of Virginia City spread out below, the setting sun painting the buildings in shades of gold and purple. "She's determined to understand how the pumps work." Zara smiled at the mention of their 4-year-old daughter, whose curiosity and mechanical aptitude already showed signs of surpassing even her mother's. "We could bring her on Saturday when it's quieter. Let her see the surface operations." "She'll have the whole place running by the time she's 15, Xavier predicted with paternal pride. "And no one will tell her she can't," Zara added softly. "That's what matters most." As they approached their home, they could see Rebecca on the front porch with Mrs. Hoffman, who had become a surrogate grandmother to the child. The older woman had sold her bookshop the previous year, but had refused Zara and Xavier's invitation to live with them, insisting on maintaining her independence while still being a regular presence in their lives. "Mama, Papa," Rebecca called, racing down the path to meet them, her dark hair so like Xavier's streaming behind her. "I made a water wheel today. Grandma Hoffman helped me. It really turns when you pour water on it." Xavier swept the child up into his arms. "Did you now? That sounds like something we should see immediately." As Rebecca chattered excitedly about her creation, Zara felt the familiar surge of gratitude that had become a constant companion. The path hadn't always been smooth. There had been resistance to her ideas. skepticism about her capabilities, and occasional outright hostility from those who believed women should remain in the domestic sphere. But for every obstacle, there had been allies. Xavier, always her strongest advocate; Donnelly, who had staked his reputation on her abilities; Mrs. Hoffman, whose quiet wisdom had guided them through difficult decisions; and countless miners whose lives had been improved by her innovations. Later that evening, after Rebecca had been tucked into bed with promises of a visit to the mine, Zara and Xavier sat on their porch, watching as lights began to twinkle across Virginia City. The town had changed in the years since they'd first met, new buildings rising, old prejudices slowly eroding, possibilities expanding for those once relegated to the margins. "I had a letter from the patent office today," Xavier said, reaching into his pocket. "The application for the safety coupling was approved. That makes 14 patents now between us." Zara leaned against his shoulder, a sense of satisfaction warming her. Father would have been amazed. He always said one good patent could make a career. "He would have been proud of you," Xavier said, slipping his arm around her waist. "Though not surprised, I think. He saw your potential long before anyone else." "Not before you," Zara corrected gently. "You saw it when everyone else was telling me I'd never amount to anything." Xavier smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I just recognized a kindred spirit, someone who refused to accept the limitations others tried to impose." As they sat together in the gathering dusk, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a confrontation on a dusty street to a partnership that had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others. The girl who had been told she would never amount to anything had become a woman whose designs and innovations were saving lives throughout the mining West. "What are you thinking?" Xavier asked, the familiar question a touchstone in their relationship. "That potential is a curious thing," Zara replied. "It exists whether others recognize it or not. But having someone who believes in it, who nurtures it instead of trying to crush it, that makes all the difference." Xavier nodded, understanding as he always did. "And now you're doing the same for others. For Rebecca. For those young engineers who look to you for guidance. For the women in town who have started approaching you about opportunities they never thought possible." It was true. In recent months, Zara had begun receiving letters and visits from women throughout the region, young girls seeking advice on education, widows looking for ways to support themselves, mothers wanting more for their daughters than society typically allowed. Without intending to, she had become a symbol of what was possible when talent was recognized and nurtured regardless of gender. "We've built something important here," Zara acknowledged. "Not just the patents or the safety improvements, but a different way of seeing what's possible." "And we're just getting started," Xavier reminded her. "The Consolidated Virginia is talking about expanding operations. The new silver deposits they've found could extend the life of the mine by decades." Zara smiled, thinking of the blueprints currently spread across their home workshop table, designs for a new type of mining equipment that could operate more safely in the deepest levels. "Then we'd better get back to work tomorrow. The future won't build itself." As they sat together watching the stars emerge above Virginia City, Zara Jenkins Wright felt the perfect symmetry of their journey, from a chance meeting where one person had recognized the value in another when no one else could see it, to a partnership that had proven everyone wrong. They had built a life together that honored both their individual talents and their shared vision, creating a legacy that would outlast them in the innovations that made miners' lives safer, and in the example they set for future generations. In a town built on silver, they had discovered that the most valuable resource wasn't buried in the mountains, but in the human potential that so often went unrecognized. And in recognizing that potential in each other, they had created something far more precious than all the silver in the Comstock lode, a future limited only by their imagination and strengthened by their unwavering belief in each other.